Welcome to the December 15th Storage Provider Meetup. Today we've got a number of things to talk about, and as usual, the storage provider special topic at the end. I'll just start this with kind of an update to what I started with, I think, in the last call. So just kind of mentioned that the incentives that were paid out at the start of December had a bit of a miscalculation to them. That has been corrected, and those who might have been shortchanged by that was fixed. We sent out the proper balances, so this was kind of a real-life version of the Monopoly bank error in your favor. Don't say that never happens, because that happened here, and we overpaid a little bit, but that's to all of your benefit, so we're not too sorry about it. Aside from that, we also had a slew of Xminer updates and releases over the last week. So, of course, these are updates to the hardware Xminers. Those should have been sent out about a week ago, or perhaps over the weekend. And as well, over the last day or two, updates to the DIY Xminer. So both Windows, Linux, all of those configurations, everywhere that you can run full Xminer, we have those updates out as well. So if you're unsure how to do that installation process, go ahead and log into the console. Kind of the same process as how you set it up in the first place, but we'll have those instructions there for you on how to upgrade. But what's contained in this release, this list is more specifically for the full Xminers, or the DIY full licenses. So there's improvements to the Windows migration function, rebate swaps. I'm going to talk more about that afterward. Some various kind of bug fixes. The installer should work for migrations and full. That's kind of unified now. Some fixes and improvements around the password or seed verification errors that could come up during installation process, and some e-commerce fixes on our backend that you guys probably don't know too much about, but sometimes some of the little issues that come up with perhaps licenses not appearing correctly, or thinking that something was maybe not licensed when it actually is. Some of those, the causes behind that has been resolved as well. So good stuff all around. I think you can expect another pretty important release in the next week or two, and that will be getting you all prepared for the forthcoming SPFB fork that we've kind of discussed a bit about before. So there should be another update coming in the next week or two. That'll be more of just an SPD update. So probably not a ton of changes to the actual UI or function, but that will be a release as well that everybody who's on a basic license will also need to update for. But we'll make a big noise when that time comes. If you pay attention to announcements at all, then you're sure not to miss it. So yeah, we'll bring lots of attention to that when it's time, and probably the next storage provider meet, since that would be December 29th, then that will probably be what we'll talk about then. So there we already have a topic for next time. So as I just kind of alluded to, this SPFB remit option, it should be in all of your UIs now, if you have a UI anyway. This will show up under the rebates section. It should be a little button that says something along the lines of that you can remit your existing and future rebates for SPFB instead. So we've talked at somewhat great length before about what SPFBs are, so not going to kind of totally rehash all that, but just kind of a reminder of what this option is. So it is the ability, if your Xminer, either hardware or full, has received rebates, which probably a lot of you have or will receive rebates, then it allows you to return them and instead receive SPFB at a pretty favorable amount. We're giving 10,000 SPFB for 64 terabyte Xminers, and I believe 6,500 for 16 terabyte Xminers. So that's a pretty sweet amount of SPFB. Perhaps another consideration with the rebates as well is that rebates have been kind of paid to you at the rate that was going for SCP at the time, but that rate has surely changed since. So if you were paid your SCP when the price of SCP was higher, then you would have received probably fewer SCP than if you're to get them now. So you can also kind of think of this remit option as an ability to kind of trade back your SCP at that more favorable rate and still redeem them for SPFB. So that's pretty cool. Before we get too far away from Xminer stuff as well, I also wanted to mention something kind of from our tech support department. So it came to our attention over the last little while that a number of examiners, either full or hardware, some people have their UIs kind of open to the internet. So what that might look like is either port 80 is forwarded in your router, or if you set up your examiner, once again, either hardware or DIY, if you set that up in a DMZ on your router, then that could also have that effect. And just wanted to bring a little bit of attention to that is not, it's not a good thing. It's not desirable. Your UI should be only accessible to your local network. So unless you're absolutely certain that it's closed off to the internet, please just, if you have an examiner, either full or hardware, please just look into that and make sure that your port 80 is not accessible from the outside world, or else somebody could come into your UI and click that remit rebate option for you, which, I mean, maybe you're on the fence about anyway, but it's nice if, obviously, if you have that option for yourself. So in general, yeah, your UI should only be accessible to you. So just on behalf of the tech support department, just wanted to put that out there. And a number of people have already been emailed. We did kind of a sweep to see which of our customers had it open, and we already sent out some emails for that. A number of those have already closed it, so that's awesome. But if you maybe were sent the email and just didn't see it, or went to spam or something, because that does happen sometimes, you can't reach everybody, then yeah, just wanted to give another platform for getting that message out there. What's also going on, so our Black Friday and Beyond sale is continuing. As we said when we announced it, it would kind of run from Black Friday to the end of the year, and it has just gotten even better since. So on top of the existing options and sales that are kind of involved in that, and the 10,000 SPFB that's up for grabs on the 64 terabyte miners, we're also now able to offer some refurbished miners. So these are miners that have been sent back to us for whatever reason. They're in good condition, and we're able to kind of offer them out to the world again. My understanding is they have mostly new hard drives, so that's pretty good. Obviously, that would be ideal. So these are units that, yeah, we still have our full warranty behind. We're still confident in them. Any refurbs that we got that we weren't 100% confident in, we wouldn't be sending out to the world. We might be using them for some test nets or internal purposes, but these are ones that are in great shape and are ready to see prime time, but we're able to offer them for a bit of a discount. So we're doing that now. We have refurb 64 and 16 terabyte miners. Honestly, pretty awesome rates. Definitely check that out. You can see it under the product list on xminer.net. And we still are offering our full SPFB rebate suite with that. So 64s are still getting 10,000, 16s are still getting 6,500, which is pretty superb. So don't miss that. And of course, they still include full licenses, or they include DIY licenses. So that's an awesome way to kind of just buy one miner and you almost get two, which is pretty awesome. So I personally have a DIY as well as an X miner, and I kind of like having both those options. Just gives you some different flavors of the same kind of thing. So definitely think about it. And to kind of further sweeten the deal, we're also offering this what I call the trio combo. So that's not the official name. Don't call it that. I just thought that was kind of fun sounding. But if you purchase 3 examiners of any type in this Black Friday and Beyond sale, then we will double the amount of SPFB that we send to you. So if you ordered like 3 64 terabyte examiners, either refurb or the full new listing, then instead of getting 30,000 SPFB, you would get 60,000, which is a lot of SPFB. So that would be awesome. So yeah, look at that. Think about it. Details are in announcements as usual, but I think that's a very compelling option, and I'm glad that we're able to offer it. So continuing with our kind of things that have had some updates or kind of news over the last few weeks. I think we released a blog post a week or two ago discussing that we were considering changing the consensus algorithm, or a slight tweak to the consensus algorithm that would have a certain effect to our consensus mining. So once again, I clarify this every time. This has no effect on examiners or any storage providers. This is purely for the ASIC mining side. If you don't know what that is, then you probably don't have to worry too much about it. But what this change would effectively do is make it so that instead of kind of all Blake 2B miners being able to mine, only some of them would be able to mine. You can read the full blog post if you're interested in why. But yeah, the kind of news and update and announcement that I'm bringing this week is that while we are still considering that, we're not considering that change for this fork that's happening at the end of the year. So it's generally good when you're making a consensus algorithm tweak to give lots of notice. And while we have tried to do that, we have kind of decided that it would be good to give like a whole lot of notice and consideration. So we've kind of tentatively bumped that to mid next year. So let's call it, at this point, let's call it June 2023. There will be more communications and updates, obviously, as we work toward that. And if any developments happen for whatever reason, then you can expect to hear from us on that as well. But at this point, it's still kind of on the cards, but it isn't super imminent. So you don't have to, you don't have the clock really ticking for any changes. Or if you're interested in ASIC mining, then you don't have like only a couple weeks to figure out what you're going to do. We think that it's fair to give people lots of notice and lots of time. So that's what we're doing. Something else that happened this week that I'm really happy to be able to talk about because, well, it involves me and I am a little bit vain. So I'll get a little more perked up for this part. But SCP University, so we've discussed that in previous calls or previous storage provider meetups. So the goal of SCP University, what this kind of is, for those who have kind of missed it or aren't familiar, haven't heard the whole backstory. So the goal of this series is that it's kind of, or the format in particular, is that it's 3 lectures by yours truly. And the goal of it is to try and produce kind of well-rounded students and I guess graduates of this SCP University at the end. So the kind of thinking behind it is that we have people coming into our community and even people coming to our team and partners, and really the line is kind of blurring between all of those things, like community, partner, team member. That's kind of one of the awesome things actually about Discord and the current crypto communities, is that the lines do get kind of blurred between those things. And that's actually how a lot of us on the team got involved. We started out as community members, and this idea intrigued us. We looked into it, but something that has become kind of apparent over the years, and this is just kind of natural that it happens because people come in with different backgrounds, have different understanding of things. But we have found that even people who have sometimes been pretty close to the project for a long time still have some kind of gaps in their understanding or slight discrepancies in different people's understanding of what our kind of goals are, how certain things work. So we decided that it was kind of time and the right way to do it, to have these dedicated lectures that essentially dedicate some time to just overviewing kind of what is SC Prime, what are we trying to do, what are all the different considerations, even getting a little bit into like what motivated it, like what's some of the backstory, because I think that'll definitely help kind of understand the lay of the land, the different markets that we operate in, because once again, we're not just operating within the crypto and blockchain space, but we're operating in like the cloud storage space as well, which has some similarities, sure, but also a lot of differences. And being well versed in both of those is something that is kind of challenging and difficult. So so the goal of this program is to produce kind of well-rounded people. So if you're coming in and maybe there is an area that you understand really well, but even if you just learn 1 or 2 things that maybe wasn't your area of expertise, then I think I would consider that time well spent. I hope you would as well. So that's what we're hoping to do with this program. So it's currently being run as kind of lectures of 10 to 15 or so people. This past week, we already had lecture 1. So if you were in that lecture, then awesome. I enjoyed having you guys, but there will be more in the future. And what we're kind of hoping to do with this is that I am recording these lectures. We might offer a couple kind of classes of people. So if you missed the first class, no worries. We're likely to offer this again, but what I'm hoping to ultimately do is have these sessions recorded. I'll kind of take some of the strongest parts of the different lectures that are given and assemble kind of polished and finished online tutorials and like online lectures, so that one day we can ultimately have these hosted on the internet, or like through a kind of web portal, so people can come in who are interested in getting some kind of like SCP certification, maybe some kind of stamp. There could be a role in Discord associated with it. I think that'd be kind of cool if next to your name you had a little graduate hat or something. And it just kind of indicates, or it shows, that you've been through this kind of first party information. You've heard like directly from the source, being us, exactly like how everything works, what we're trying to do, also that kind of thing. So there's no like you're hearing second or third hand information through YouTube or through Twitter or Discord. You're kind of reading it right from us, or you're hearing it right from us. So that's what we're hoping to be able to offer. And as well as, in addition to kind of SCP University, what this will also mirror is some Exonet Services Cloud Professional certifications. So this is probably familiar to you if you maybe work in the tech industry, but I'll just kind of go over it again kind of quickly. That it's pretty common when it comes to like platforms like Google or Amazon or Microsoft, or Oracle, like whatever platform you name, that there are some kind of accreditation or certification courses that you can take, that are kind of like these online classes. They're usually not too long and they're typically free, but you spend a bit of time, maybe a couple times a week, or over the course of a couple of weeks, you spend some time sitting down, listening to some modules, maybe answering some questions, and at the end of it, you hopefully come out with a certification that shows that you understand how AWS works, or you understand how Oracle works, and you're kind of a somewhat accredited professional. So we're hoping to offer those same kinds of certifications so that people who are interested in working on our platform can get information directly from us, and then be able to represent that as well, that they have had those kinds of sessions and modules with us. So this is an effort that we're putting forward. So there's kind of a community-oriented side of this, which is SCP University, and then there's a more platform and kind of professional side of this as well, which is the Exonet Services Cloud Professional. So those are things that we're working on and are in progress. So that's pretty cool, and I'm excited to share that, because these are things that I'm working on. So yeah, you can expect to hear probably more about that Exonet Services Cloud Professional thing in the new year, because the courses that we're running right now are the SCP University side, but I am looking forward to having all of that be available for you guys. Okay, so the storage provider special topic that I kind of brought up, that we are going to be focusing on this week. So last week, if you recall, it was metadata. So we went over metadata for storage providers, kind of what you need to know, what is metadata. We talked a bit about like backups and some considerations for that. So if you want to hear the full scoop, then you can tune into last week's call. We had our tech support lead on there as well, so we were hearing from a pretty good authority on how all of that worked. But this week, no guest, it's just yours truly, and we're going to be discussing host financials. So this is something that is obviously pretty good to have a understanding of, because it directly affects not only like how you get paid, but if you understand how it works, then hopefully there will never be any surprises for like getting paid, or perhaps if you're expecting a payment and one didn't come, or anything like that. It's certainly good to be financially literate, not only in the real world, but also in blockchain space. So let's tackle it. There's a couple different kind of angles and facets that host financials take. This is a pretty broad category, just kind of from a high level overview, but we'll start with establishing some kind of basics. So I hope your eyes don't glaze over. We're not going to get too deep into the technicals, but try and stay with me here, and I think it'll be time well spent. So probably the first thing to kind of touch on when we get into host financials, and this is something that I'm sure you've heard before, is the word contracts. So smart contracts, blockchain contracts, you've probably heard of them before. What they actually are on our network anyway is a kind of binding agreement between a renter and a host that is made memorialized on the blockchain. So what that means is that there are these different kind of contracts on the blockchain that you can see. I have one opened up in front of me right now on an Explorer, and I can see who the renter is in a certain contract. I can see who the host is in a certain contract. I can see the name of the contract, so that differentiates it from all the other ones. I can see when it started. I can see when it is expected to end. I can see the rate that the renter and the host have agreed on. So that would be like SCP per terabyte per month kind of thing. And there's some other considerations as well, like that a renter has to provide allowance, a host has to provide collateral. So there's a lot of things that we've kind of touched on here, but let's break it down a little bit. So yeah, the first thing to establish, although it's pretty simple, is that a contract has a renter and a host. The fact that there is a renter and host kind of involved has informed the name of our kind of protocol, or what we call it, the renter-host protocol. This is kind of or the renter-host protocol, I suppose, is the name of our kind of implementation that has enabled us to use blockchain for facilitating storage contracts and storage payments. So anyway, every contract has a renter and host. This is probably not a shocker. In the real world, it works kind of the same way, that if you're renting cloud storage, the renter is you probably, and the host is like AWS or Microsoft or whoever. But in this case, I know that most of you listening are probably storage providers. So in this case, you're actually the host, and the renter is probably us at the blockchain level. So the renter provides allowance, and the host provides collateral. These are probably going to be about the same number. That is because on our network, we generally expect a host to put up the same amount of collateral that the contract is kind of worth. So that means if the going rate is maybe something like 20 SCP per terabyte, the renter would lock up 20 SCP per terabyte. So let's work with nice numbers here. Let's assume the contract is for about a terabyte. So the renter might lock up about 20 SCP, and the host might lock up about 20 SCP as well in terms of collateral. This doesn't have to be one-to-one. So if you've been around for a little while, you might remember like a couple years ago when there was a time where there was an expectation actually that the host locks up something like 3 times the amount of collateral, or like 3x collateral. So if a contract were worth 20 SCP, then the host would be expected to lock up something like 60. That isn't an expectation that we have anymore. That was kind of one of the fundamental kind of assumptions that we revisited when we did our own implementation of the renter-host protocol that our network is now on. Some of the wisdom that was considered kind of conventional, we kind of rethought and reframed, and we kind of came to the conclusion that there's no real reason for collateral to be way higher than the value of the contract is. That's just not necessary. So yeah, that's a long way to say and provide some context for being able to say that, let's say a renter provides 20 SCP to pay for a contract. The host also has to lock up 20 SCP as collateral. And just kind of restating what that collateral is, that is just assurance that the host is incentivized to actually complete that contract. If the host didn't have any skin in the game, so let's say there were no collateral, or there was no collateral involved, then there's no way for a renter to be confident that this particular host isn't just going to disappear with their data. Obviously the host probably wants to get paid, so that could be some assurance that they don't disappear, but it isn't actually, there's no penalty to that, so that would just be the lack of a reward. But for an actual blockchain system like this to work well and be functional, there needs to be not just rewards for doing good stuff, but sometimes there needs to be to be an actual penalty for doing bad stuff. So yeah, that's why you have to provide some collateral when you get a contract. That just ensures that you stick around to the completion of the contract. And if you're good, and the vast majority of storage providers are, you get that contract back, you get that collateral back, and you get the payment for the contract that was the allowance of the renter. At contract formation, both allowance and collateral is locked up. The reason why the allowance is locked up, actually, this is in the interest of the host. So how can the host be sure that after I agree to a contract and I agree at a rate and I start accepting data from a renter, how do I know that they're actually good for the money? They're not just going to stiff me and kind of disappear. So that's why they have to show that they have the full amount, and they kind of put it in somewhat of an escrow in the meantime. So they lock that up. So yeah, the way that I kind of like to think about these things to help me understand is I kind of make the analog to a real world contractual agreement. So perhaps you're getting some work done on a renovation or something. The person that you're contracting for the construction, perhaps of a renovation in your house, they want to be confident that you're good for the money, and you want to be confident that you're actually getting the services that you pay for, and that they're going to finish the work. So these are some kind of real world considerations for a contract, and these work exactly the same way on the blockchain, but this way we're able to kind of have a self-regulating system so that everyone is good for the money. There's no cheating of the system. You can't stiff anybody. It's just fair, open, treats everyone the same. You always have the outcome you're expecting. So that's good. Now, another consideration when it comes to SCP kind of contracts, so obviously the payment for the contract is in terms of SCP. That is, once again, our utility token for our network. That is we consider it a utility token just because that is the main purpose of SCP. SCP isn't trying to be money. You're never going to buy coffee one day in SCP. It's not trying to replace anything. The SCP exists solely to be redeemable on our network for storage. However, every time that a contract is formed, some amount of the value of that contract is actually split off and paid out to SPF. So this is hopefully something that you've heard a little bit about if you've looked into what SPF are and the way that they kind of create value or produce value. So yeah, every time a contract is formed on the network, a certain amount of the value of that contract, of the SCP that's kind of changing hands there, a certain cut of that is set aside to go to SPF holders, and that SPF fee is then split across the whole population of SPF. So that means that if you have SPF or you hold SPF, that you'll hopefully be getting a little bit of a dividend there. That dividend is composed of a bunch of these little really tiny payments that are coming from like thousands and thousands of contracts from across the network. But the idea is, and this is what we expect to see as the network grows and eventually reaches very large scales, is that these like thousands and thousands of contracts, although each one is only contributing a pretty small amount of SCP, at the end, if there's eventually like thousands of or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of providers on the network, and the amount of data being stored is very valuable, and then this could, the SPF fee could eventually actually end up kind of accumulating quite a nice sum each month. So that's the way that it all kind of comes together in a full cycle. So the SCP is paid by the renter to the host for storage. A little bit of that payment is split off as kind of a tax, some people consider it, but probably a fee is more accurate to say. But yeah, some amount of the value of that contract goes as a fee to the SPF holders, which could be you if you decide to remit some of your rebate, or if you remit your rebate for SPFB, then you will be advantaged in that position and some of that fee will go to you. Right. So I was kind of talking about a bit of the market cycle. So everything kind of comes in a nice circle of the renter has SCP, they pay it to the host, then the host gets SCP, a little bit of that payment is taken off and split across SPF holders. But to kind of complete the cycle, and this will sound obvious at first, but I'll tell you why I'm bothering to explain it like this. To complete that cycle, then a host then has SCP. They can sell it back to the renter. Some of the SPF holders also have SCP. They can sell that back to the renter. And this kind of creates an organic market cycle where there is demand for SCP, there's supply for SCP, and this kind of has a baked in that there will always be value and demand for SCP as long as there is storage on the network. And storage on the network is the single thing that all of this is trying to do, so that's pretty obvious. But the reason why I think it's important to kind of highlight these fairly obvious points is that some of the storage networks that I've spent time looking at, there is actually some kind of concerning design and architecture where there isn't actually demand for the network token. So it is typical across storage networks that they mostly do rely on utility tokens. So whether it's Filecoin or storage or whoever, they are mostly doing payments in their network utility token. That's not a shock, but what was kind of surprising to me when I was looking into them is the fact that the founders, or in this case the renters, they have so much of the supply locked up either through like a pre-mine or like a dev fee or a dev wallet. They have so much of the network token that there's no real reason for them to ever actually buy it on the market. So hosts are getting paid the utility token, but nobody's buying it, or like there's no organic demand for it. And that is something that I think people haven't necessarily realized yet, or I haven't seen a lot of concern for the fact that that dynamic exists and it does work like that. But it does make me think, when I look at our network and I see everything kind of fit together nicely in a market cycle that has a beginning and an end, and then it all kind of fits together, of how like the renter pays the host pays, or the host can then sell those coins back to the renter. There's no kind of silliness involved. It just makes me kind of thankful that it's that organic and effective as a economic model. So that's largely kind of contracts, and so on the host side, we consider that the proceeds from contracts to be kind of rent. So we've discussed the rate that you get paid is typically SCP per terabyte per month. The reason why there's that kind of per month at the end there is that the typical length of a contract is about a month. The ways that contracts can end, they can either renew, which is what we expect they will typically do. The reason why most contracts will renew is because if somebody uploads you data, they're probably not going to be like, oh yeah, it's fine, I don't need that data anymore. You can just go ahead and delete it. Most of the time when you upload data for retrieval later, you still want it to be there later. So we expect most storage contracts to renew. However, for various reasons, they can sometimes expire. So that's when a storage contract reaches the end date that was agreed on when the contract formed, and there's no changes. So the renter decides not to continue with that contract. So that one's pretty straightforward actually. The contract expires, and there's a third type as well that can happen called a revision. So in a revision, it's kind of like a renew, but it's a renew where the terms of the contract also kind of change. So that could happen for various reasons. Probably the most common one is if a renter might start a contract saying, hey, I want to rent like 500 gigs of data, and then partway through the course of that contract they realize, oh, I actually want 800 gigs of data. Then they can propose a revision to the host, and the host will be like, heck yeah, I'll take more data. So then they agree on a revision to the contract that would now, instead of 500 gigs, now it's 800 gigs. So those are some of the ways that contracts can kind of change or evolve or sometimes end. But yeah, for the most part, we expect them to renew. And one thing that you can kind of think of a renew contract is as a subscription. So we're used to kind of paying subscriptions, whether it's Netflix or a phone bill or something like that. There's a number of financial transactions that we do that are monthly, and typically we're paying out. But in this case, since we're providing storage, which is a valuable service, this time we're actually getting paid. So if you accept gigabytes as a host, you kind of earn long-term subscription revenue from the renter for that, which is pretty cool. So I think it's kind of important to remember that most storage that you get as a host, you will be keeping long-term, because most renters aren't just uploading storage to you to only keep for a week or two. Most of the time they want it accessible long-term. So most of the data that you get, you're likely to keep, and that data that you get and keep will pay long-term dividends as a kind of building monthly subscription that you receive, which is pretty cool. Now, one last thing that I kind of want to mention about contracts is, and this is actually pretty integral to how the renter-host protocol works and how it's able to be effective, and this is storage proofs. So you may have heard of these, and this is a pretty common and kind of fundamental dynamic to our renter-host protocol and some of the other storage networks that are out there that have their own kind of analogs to the renter-host protocol. But a storage proof, fundamentally, is just a way that you, as the host, can prove that you still have a piece of data that a renter uploaded to you. So the motivation behind this problem, the reason why this dynamic exists, is pretty obvious. As a renter, you want to be confident that if you're still paying someone for data, you want to be sure that they actually still have that data and that they aren't accepting more data than they can actually store. And then you find out 6 months from now when you go to retrieve a file that they don't actually have it, but they've been happy to take your money this whole time, saying that they do have it. So storage proofs are a way that is kind of built in and native to our renter-host protocol. It's a way that renters can be sure that hosts are making good on their promises and that data is actually not just intact, but also accessible. So storage proofs, I am expecting to do over the next week or two a kind of deep dive guide on them. So you can maybe keep an eye out for that. But at kind of a high level, the way that they work is that a renter, obviously a renter knows all of the data that it is sent out to different hosts. And they will pick a kind of random, or they'll pick a certain sector of data, and they'll say, hey, host, if you still have the data that you're telling me that you still have, then what is the Merkle root of this sector? Now, without getting into Merkle roots and all that, because that's where it does get technical, and I'm trying to kind of gloss over some of this stuff, but it's essentially a way of saying, if you really do have this particular piece of data, then tell me something about it. And hopefully the host provides, the right answer. So this might be a real world equivalent, might be in a library saying, hey, if you really have all these books, then which book is on this particular row and shelf? Then tell me the list of books on this one row that's in some shelf way in the back. And probably the only way that you could actually properly answer that is if you truly have all of those books. So this is kind of a system that's pretty native and important to our protocol. This is how renters can be sure that data is still there and it's still retrievable. And for hosts, this is how they can kind of prove themselves as well as good hosts that have a good track record. You can trust them. You might want to potentially give your business to this host as opposed to some other one that maybe doesn't have as good of a track record. This kind of tracking and accountability benefits everyone. So what happens if you fail a storage proof? So if for whatever reason that storage was not actually available, the host maybe replies with the wrong answer, or replies way too late. So if they reply a week later, then what happens in that case is the collateral that the storage provider put up at the front of the contract gets lost. So that is kind of the penalty that we alluded to earlier. There is rewards for being a good provider, but there's also punishment, I guess, for not being a good provider. And this is kind of the flip side of it. So if you fail a storage proof, the collateral that you put up gets lost. And that's just kind of how everybody is incentivized to keep working together, keep being honest, and honoring commitments that you've made, and keeping the network happy and functional. So all of this that we've covered has been kind of contract focused. We typically consider that as rent. You may see that in some of our kind of docs or FAQs or whatever. We typically call the proceeds from contracts rent. But there's another type of host financials or host proceeds that you can receive, and these are incentives. So at this point in time, these are typically monthly payments. These aren't built into the contracts. They are paid out over the blockchain, but just as normal like blockchain like sends or normal transactions. But how these incentives work is that these are direct payments from from the network or from us, like SCP Corp. We have all sorts of tracking data that shows who all of the hosts on our network are, how much data they have, like their uptime, these kinds of factors. And using these, we can start building profiles of kind of who's a good provider, where are certain providers, and we can do all sorts of things with that. So at this point in time, what's probably familiar to all of you is the used storage incentive. So at this point, you get paid on storage at a contract level. Well, we also pay you bonus money for having storage at an incentive level, and that's because it's pretty important during the build-up of our network that hosts are profitable and happy, and we want all of you to be profitable and happy. So we are happy to pay you kind of bonus money for that. But in the future, we're expecting to have different incentive categories as well. Things like perhaps your region, your time in service. So that's actually a kind of underrated one. It is important if you're a host that you kind of be around for a while. So that's a large reason for that, is that renters who have given you data in the past expect to still be able to retrieve it. So we expect there to be kind of a bias, or at least it pays to be around for a while once you're set up. So those are some different incentive categories that can exist. But today we have the storage use incentive. Those typically get paid around the first or maybe the second sometimes of each month. So that is kind of a monthly incentive. At the end of the month, we run the numbers across all our providers on who gets what, and then we pay it out usually on the first or second day of each month. And kind of the last thing that I think it makes sense to touch on with when it comes to host kind of financials and some of the economics around our network. So we've touched on big things like contracting and how the renter fits in. We've talked about our SPF. If you're like an SPF holder, how that works, where that SCP is coming from, how it's distributed. We've kind of touched on some of these things. And where I think it'll all start to kind of come together is when we talk about the fact that our network, although we consider it today to be kind of Web 2.5, meaning that it can deliver Web 3 functionality and capabilities, but in a manner that is kind of acceptable and fits or integrates nicely with Web 2. Although that's kind of the state of our network today, it is ingrained right in our model and our architecture that we're able to kind of pivot fully to Web 3.0 in the future. So we don't have a date on that or any like immediate like plans or something that we can announce, but we have in our model today, if you're kind of familiar with it, you know that one of the more kind of, I guess, centralized ways or dynamics on our network is the fact that in order to become a renter or to like store data on our network, so we have Exanet Services, which is the company that you go through. And where the centralization kind of is on our network today, when it comes to storing data on it, is that, or like it's through the billing and payment. So to store data on our network, you pay in dollars to Exanet services. You receive storage on our network, or at least you have a certain amount that you can upload on our network. And that's kind of how it works. Exanet services itself then is taking those dollars and paying SCP to the hosts on the network as a result of that. So the only real kind of, I'm kind of hesitant to even call it centralization, because I think that's fairly minor in the grand scheme of things. But the only thing that's kind of holding us back from full Web 3.0 at the moment is around that payment details, and the fact that a renter today anyway can't just go out and acquire some SCP themselves and pay that personally out to the hosts. The reason I phrased it like that is because that's something that is totally possible within our architecture and our system, that one day when we think the renters are ready, they'll be able to go out and do exactly that. The reason why that isn't quite a thing yet is because we know that the partners and the companies that we're working with and talking to, they don't really want to do that. In fact, they're pretty happy to keep paying dollars each month for their storage. That's what they're used to. They don't really want to take on the custody and liability and tax complications that come from actually hosting crypto wallets and having to acquire them. Some of the volatility that comes with that. They're pretty happy to let that be something that we take care of. So that's why things kind of are the way that they are today. But we expect, it could be 2 years, it could be 5 years. We don't know, but we expect that one day some partners or major users on our network will come to us and say, hey, we're pretty confident in how this network works. We have a lot of that knowledge kind of in-house now from having used your network. And we feel that, we'd kind of like to be able to take on that responsibility ourselves. And we're able to say, hell yeah, and hand over those resources and know-how when that day comes. And at that point, we would consider our network to be fully kind of Web3, which is awesome. And we're able to do that without really even changing anything fundamental to our network. We don't expect there to be any fork when we have to do that. There will be no network upgrade. It's just totally systems that are already in place and just handing them over to different parties. So the reason I kind of bring all of this up is that when this move to Web 3.0 happens, at that point, since the renters will be supplying the SCP themselves, they won't be going through Exanet services, then at that point, the revenue through the network being paid out to the SPF, kind of in the SPF fee, that will be how SC Prime as a company is kind of funded. So we can continue developing software that way because we, as a kind of company and a foundation, we have a lot of the SPF supply. Obviously, a lot of you also have a lot of the SPF supply. So it's a pretty reasonable balance. A large part of the reason why we're introducing this SPFB is because we felt that the distribution before was a little off, and we wanted to get, a lot more storage provider incorporation into the SPFB distribution. So that's why we have gone, way out of our way to incorporate storage providers into this process and make them available to you guys in the form of SPFB. But I just felt that any discussion around host financials wouldn't be complete if I didn't mention that it's kind of on our radar, and the day will come where we reach full Web 3.0, and by that point the network and the economy around our network will be pretty diverse and mature. And when that day comes, then all SPF, including SPFB, will be how kind of our development is able to continue on. So that's kind of a nice finishing touch and a little bit of a bow to put at the end of the discussion of host financials, kind of the future and the end direction that we see things going. So at this point, I'll take a big drink of water and start accepting questions. So I'll give you guys a moment to think of some. You can either type them out or put your hand up. Uh, I'm trying to think of if there's anything I didn't quite get to in the discussion of host financials, but I think that was pretty complete. Uh, but yeah, I'll allow you to put your hand up or type something out in the events channel if you have any questions. Hey, Sparky.
So kind of a loaded question, but kind of just to make a point that comes up quite a bit. What happens at the end of a contract and the start of a renewal of a new contract in terms of collateral? Because there's like an overlap period between those two contracts from the collateral point of view. Can we just talk through what happens there and the sort of requirements for the provider to have enough collateral to cover both the old contract and the new contract?
Sure, that's a good question. So I did kind of state that we expect the vast majority of our contracts to renew. Um, so in a contract renewal, the way that that kind of looks on the blockchain is that um, one contract will kind of end, and then there will be a new contract that has a lot of the same kind of ID and same information from that contract, but it will be a new contract formed um, that is for the same data, but it will have a new kind of life of its own for the next month. Uh, and yeah, the way that a contract renew works at kind of a really low level in the actual blockchain level is that the new contract is formed and then the old contract expires. So the kind of nuance to that and then the upshot of it is that you need to provide the collateral for the new contract before you get back the collateral for the old contract. So once again, when I kind of say you need to provide the collateral, all of this is done automatically by the wallet software, and it's in SPD and it's in all the X miners. So I don't mean this in like an active sense of like you're actually logging onto the computer and having to do anything. This is all automatically performed, but it does mean that you need to have enough SCP in the provider wallet, not just to cover 1 month, but to actually cover 2 months, because there's a brief overlap of where you're providing collateral for the next month before you get the previous month back. So that does effectively have kind of a doubling in the amount of collateral that you need to cover. You need to have enough for 2 months. But once again, I think that that's pretty manageable for most providers. And the fact that we drop that down to just kind of 1x collateral from what used to be like 2 or 3x collateral, then I think it's pretty manageable how it is today. But thank you for asking.
Yeah, thanks for
So I can still take some more questions, but one thing that I did think of that I didn't get to mentioning, we do expect over the next several months in the X miners and in the UI itself to have kind of rework how we present our accounting. So I will say that we know today that while the UI has come a long way when it comes to actually presenting, how much is your X miner producing each month, like in terms of SCP, what has the history been like, how can I actually visualize my contracts. We've come a long way in those regards, but there's still a couple points of confusion um, and some things that we could do to kind of present things a little more clearly. And one feature that I know we're looking forward to being able to bring out is some kind of like tax and accounting exports as well. So when it starts getting toward tax season in the new year, um, then I think a lot of people will be having to kind of think about the problem of how do I report or how can I kind of approach actually doing taxes for my X miner or whatever storage provider setup you may have. And that's something that will be coming to full licenses and the X miner hardware itself. Some kind of export and easy, or like much easier tax kind of function that will clearly represent all of the transactions that have occurred, the kind of net changes in balance, those kinds of things. So that's something to kind of be mindful of that's coming in the new year. No particular timeline on that, but that's been something that's on our radar, and I think is definitely pertinent to discuss when we talk about host financials. All right, let's have Django Unchained on the stage. Django, I think, did I see you in this week's SCP University lecture?
Yeah. Yeah, Henry. Yeah, hi, nice to talk to you. I was definitely there. It was a great educational performance on your part. I really learned a lot about the whole background of SCP, so that was cool.
Thank you.
And I had a question about the contracts and just how that's paid out because I understand that there's a lot of redundancy, of course, with the sharding of the data that gets put onto the network. But how, I guess, roughly speaking, it's there's charged $10 per terabyte, and then roughly four of that goes to the data provider or the storage provider. But if you're having a lot of redundancy, how does that get spread out over the storage providers? I'm not quite able to work that out in my head.
Yeah, so that's a fair question. So this is kind of getting into a bit more of the extent services kind of pricing model. So you're right that we do have all of our hosts. The expectation is $4 per terabyte per month. That's kind of been a baseline that we've established. Um, and you are right that at the end, customers that are on extent services, they are paying $10 per terabyte per month. So there is kind of a relationship between, I guess, kind of data going in and data going out that's implied there. So we do have on our network kind of some level of redundancy. One thing that we think is really powerful and is kind of some of the secret sauce of our network is the fact that that redundancy is totally tunable. So you could have like you could make it so every 1 terabyte of data you have, you upload out like 10 terabytes or something onto the network, and that way you're sure that your data will like never disappear, and for a millennia it'll still be intact, or like very performant as well because you can pull those pieces from a bunch of different providers. But yeah, the downside of doing that is that you're having to pay uh, like a pretty large amount because that's a lot of redundancy that you're expecting, and you're taking up a lot more space on people's disks by doing that. Uh, so yeah, on extent services in the relayer itself, uh, in a release that's coming in the like pretty immediate future, we will be having some kind of preset levels of redundancy. So there will be kind of a level of redundancy that is for that $10 per terabyte per month tier. Um, but then there can also be higher. So if someone's okay with like maybe like $12 or $15 per terabyte a month, something like that, then they can have even more redundancy and even more performance. And then conceivably, I don't know if this is something we're moving forward on right now, but conceivably there could also be kind of a more lean offering as well, where if you're okay with less levels of redundancy, it's maybe just some data that isn't like mission critical, but you would like to have around anyway, and you just want kind of a still like all the benefits of using this distributed cloud, but for data that is kind of lower cost and less valuable, then there could be a leaner availability option as well. But so yeah, as we're kind of operating right now, I think we're using kind of 2x redundancy as kind of a baseline. So that means I guess every 1 terabyte stored from a customer ends up being like 2 terabytes on the network, and that means that we're paying for 2 terabytes, that kind of thing. But yeah, this is kind of an area that we're actively developing. We're putting a lot of research and like formalizing our approaches to calculating like optimal EC ratios, because that's really close to the kind of the secret sauce of the network, and some really important KPIs to hit. So that's something that yeah we're putting a lot of development into right now and a lot of attention into. That's something that we're going to continue to, because understanding kind of safe and performant EC ratios is really close to the heart of the network. And if you can safely get away with running a lower EC ratio, then it is more efficient to do that, and you do have some kind of optimization there. So yeah, this is kind of a big and pretty important kind of focus for the network, and it's something that I'm sure in the new year I'll be able to put out some kind of blog post detailing how we approach this problem and some of the findings that we had and those kinds of things.
Okay, cool. I look forward to that.
Yeah, cheers. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, thanks a lot, man.
Okay, I'll give one last kind of round for questions, but at this point we've run pretty much bang on 60 minutes, and that's usually about what we try to hit these days. So I won't hang on for too much longer, just out of respect for everyone's time if there's no further questions. But yeah, I think this was a pretty good call this week. So once again, just kind of recapping, we talked about the new Xminer releases for both full and UI. There will be another release this month that will be the kind of fork ready release. So that will be an update to SPD and the wallet software that will be enabling these SPFB that we are so anticipating. We touched on the Black Friday and Beyond sale and the new developments with it. So the refurb models that we're offering at pretty awesome prices. Those do include licenses, so think about that. And the kind of trio combo. So if you buy 3 examiners, we'll double the amount of SPFB that they all receive. Yeah, we talked about SCP University and some of the like professional certifications that we're expecting to be able to offer in the new year. And we talked at length about host financials and kind of what you need to know, how they work at a blockchain level, some of the different considerations that go into it, what's possible in the future with Web3, and how we can empower that and how that kind of works with the existing framework of things. And then at the end, we had some good questions there. So thank you for coming to this week's meetup. Look forward to having you all in 2 weeks, and Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. Take care, everyone.